Jared, you can come on up. Welcome. Can we welcome Jared to tell his story?
All right. Thank you. Good evening. My name is Jared Pyle. Everybody hear me okay? Sorry. Okay. Good evening. My name is Jared Pyle, and I want to thank you for listening and giving me the opportunity to share my story tonight. You know, it's the one time I kind of wish COVID mandates were in effect, because I'd probably have a lot smaller church to be talking to, but just kidding, sort of. At first, I wasn't sure how I was going to begin my story, but once I started my outline, I felt like I needed to change the title from My Story of Faithfulness to My Story of Imperfect Faithfulness, which is not to be confused with God's ever-present faithfulness in my life. I'm kind of embarrassed to say that I seem to have lessons repeated to me. I don't always learn them the first time. Lucky for me, God is full of grace and forgiveness, never leaving my side, even when I don't see him in the moment. A central theme to my story would be trusting in God's plan. My faith story is going to jump around a little bit to some key moments in my life. But first, a little background. I grew up in the church. I attended a private Christian school, K through 6th grade, where my mom was the principal. I've always identified as a Christian, but I did not see God's work in my life until later on, even though he had always been there. God really showed his faithfulness in my life when it came to my career. After college, with degrees in psychology and philosophy, it was pretty apparent, pretty obvious what my career would be. I decided to be an airline pilot. I went to flight school in Florida, racked up a bunch of debt. I got hired by an airline. I made it. It was based on the East Coast. It's kind of a big deal. Had the swagger, had the captain voice over the PA speaker, had the prestige, had the walk through the terminal, spoke at my wife's school about airplanes. But I wasn't happy. I knew deep down that this was not the life I wanted. Traveling, missing holidays, hours alone in a hotel room. It took time, but I had to swallow my pride and admit my mistake. It was very humbling. I returned home to California, and with perfect timing, jobless at the start of the Great Recession. I moved through multiple jobs, stringing tennis rackets at Sports Chalet, managing the floor at Dick's Sporting Goods, and my personal favorite, handling auto accident claims at AAA. I jumped from job to job for better hours and pay, each move making me more angry and frustrated. I prayed so hard for things to happen sooner, but looking back, God was teaching me patience. It took me 5 long years and 3 jobs along the way to get where I wanted to be. God finally answered my prayer, and I took a job in the power industry. I hired in as a grunt, a helper, a groundsman, on a line crew, digging holes, tying knots, and operating a chainsaw. You know, all those things I had studied in college. A not so glorious way into a career in the power industry. God was teaching me that his plan might not look like mine. And even though his plan might not look like mine, he was still right there beside me. Susie, my wife, was having some career issues of her own. After leaving a great school in Virginia as a teacher, where I was based, she was hired at a local public school. We thought, our worries are over. She doesn't just have a job, but she has a career. Then the recession hit, and she lost her job as well. She eventually landed a job at a small Christian school, but I'm going to touch a little more on that later. Another time God showed his grace in my life was when we had children. After we got married, the doctor told us that having kids would be hard. That didn't bother me much, though, at the time, because I wasn't ready anyways. I thought I had it all planned out, my career, my house, the perfect age to have kids. When we were ready to have kids, we ended up trying for 2 years. Anytime there was a possibility of being pregnant, I remember staring at that pregnancy test, hoping and wishing for a positive test, but ending up disappointed by another negative result. We wanted it so bad, it seemed that all our friends were having kids. It was hard to be around. We furthered our steps and began doing IUI treatments. Susie became pregnant, but that joy was short-lived after her pregnancy ended in a miscarriage. I thought maybe God didn't want me to be a dad, but God was showing me that miracles take time and that young men need to be patient. Susie eventually became pregnant again, but complications soon followed. Susie was diagnosed with preeclampsia. She would eventually be induced, and the baby would come early. After initially being discharged from the hospital, Susie would have to be readmitted for high blood pressure that was life-threatening. I felt so alone going between my wife in the hospital and my baby at home. I prayed for my wife's health and that our new family could be together. After 10 long days at the hospital, God shined his grace on me, and I was able to have my little family safe at home. God had really been with me the whole time, his faithfulness becoming fully apparent to me. Now I have 2 beautiful daughters sitting right over there. And do you remember that supposed misfortune of Susie losing her job? Well, that worked out pretty well too, as my wife and daughters get to go to school, the same school, every day. My wife teaches there. She gets to see my daughters every single day throughout the day. What seemed like a misfortune at the time, Susie losing her job, turned into a blessing that I am so grateful for. God also continued to show me his faithfulness in my life when our house move ran into a few complications. So we decided we wanted to get a bigger house, and we decided we should sell our house and buy another one during COVID. What a great idea. We would time the market, we would sell high, then buy low. We were going to move to the country, act in Agua Dulce, live that country dream, and to save money and to be more competitive, non-contingent, we could live in our old fifth-wheel toy hauler, no problem, with no pop-outs, in the Valencia Travel Village with our 2 kids. It would only be a few months after all. It would be just like camping. What a great idea. Boy, was I wrong. It turns out doing real estate during COVID presented some problems. First, it's hard to see the houses. Second, there's no open houses. And when you do go to see a house, it's like you're going in for surgery. Meanwhile, my family was not doing that well living in the trailer. It turns out my daughters had issues without having their own personal space. What had I done? Here we are, we're getting outbid on everything. Would we ever get a house? Why would I put my family through this? I prayed, and God answered. A friend from Susie's work helped us get into a month-to-month rental house. My family moved out of the trailer that we had been in for 4 months, and things were a little better. 3 months later, a house that we listed. We toured it, and we loved it. And surprisingly, the children of the family selling the house went to the same school that my wife taught at. We spoke with the sellers during the visit, and we had an instant connection. It was like it was meant to be. We were one of 7 offers, and our offer was accepted. During escrow, I came to know the sellers quite well. The husband and I would talk on the phone about sprinklers and spas and pools and watering, and that talk would quickly transition to Christianity and morals and values. Once again, God was bringing me closer to him. The Lord works in mysterious ways. God seems to enter into my life on all kinds of different fronts. No matter how stubborn or oblivious I am, he always finds a different way in. A work friend of mine got me into dirt bike racing at the age of 38. Maybe it was my midlife crisis coming early. After negotiating it with my wife and upping my Aflac policy, I was ready to race. As I'm sitting there on the starting line, engines revving, wondering what I'm doing, I was all alone. My friend was unable to race with me due to the fact that he had a fall during our practice that resulted in 7 broken ribs, a collapsed lung, and a med flight to Henry Mayo. No, it is not. I started negotiating with God for safe passage and an injury-free day. I was feeling alone and nervous, and once again, God answered. A race ministry pastor came up to me on the starting line and asked if he could pray with me. We prayed, and I felt a calm that only the Lord can give. God was on that starting line with me, just like he always is. I still ride and race, and my daughters ride and have started racing as well. We have started a new tradition in my family. Before every practice and race, the Pyle racing team prays. This is just another example of God finding a way to get into every part of my life and now the lives of my children. The last thing I would like to talk about in my story tonight is this church. I've been coming to this church for many years, but I haven't always felt totally connected to it. My sister was married here. My kids have been baptized here. 20 years ago, I would not see myself standing up here, giving a story about faith and God's faithfulness in my life. I knew Pastor Garrett in high school, and boy, could I tell you some stories. Just kidding. We were good kids. We both went to Canyon High, class of 2001. I was in a car club called the Mad Dogs. Pastor Garrett was in a car club called the Happy Cats. Now, 20-something years later, here we are. His sermons feel like they're directed at me right when I need them. And I'm not just saying that because I accidentally soaked him on my boat last summer. Sorry about that. He's helped bring me closer to God and this church. The Lord guided me back to this church. It was his plan. I just need to put faith in him, and he will provide like he always does. As I was preparing for tonight, I was reminded of a poem that hung in my grandparents' bedroom. I'd never really thought about it until now, but as I prepared, it just appeared to me. I felt like it summarizes my story and God's faithfulness in my life. It is called Footprints in the Sand, and it goes, "One night I dreamed a dream. As I was walking along the beach with my Lord, across the dark sky flashed scenes from my life. For each scene, I noticed 2 sets of footprints in the sand, one belonging to me and one to my Lord. After the last scene of my life flashed before me, I looked back at the footprints in the sand. I noticed that at many times along the path of my life, especially at the very lowest and saddest times, there was only one set of footprints. This really troubled me, so I asked the Lord about it. Lord, you said once I decided to follow you, you'd walk with me all the way. But I noticed that during the saddest and most troublesome times of my life, there was only one set of footprints. I don't understand why, when I needed you the most, you would leave me." He whispered, "My precious child, I love you and I will never leave you. Never, ever, during your trials and testings. When you saw only one set of footprints, it was then that I carried you." Thanks. Moving forward, I practice having faith in God's plan for my family and I. He continues to point me in the right direction, to show me the things that really matter, even when I miss them at first. After some brutal self-reflection, I think, I got it now. It will be different from now on, but it never is. I continue to stumble, falling into my same selfish ways. Yet, he continues to show his plan and to teach with a patience and saving grace that knows no end. I am not proud of my failings, but it is true. I am a sinner, a fallen man. But the Lord never gives up on me. He continues to shine down his blessings on me and show me the way. He teaches me how to be a better father, husband, and believer, even though I do not deserve his grace. It is always there for me. He is always there for me. I've been so very blessed in this life, and I look forward to what else God has planned for me. Thank you for listening and giving me the privilege of sharing my faith story with you.